When did making plans get this complicated? It's time to streamline with WhatsApp, the secure messaging app that brings the whole group together. Use polls to settle dinner plans. Send event invites and pin messages so no one forgets Mom's 60th. And never miss a meme or milestone. All protected with end-to-end encryption. It's time for WhatsApp. Message privately with everyone. Learn more at whatsapp.com.
We've got gifting all wrapped up at Sephora. Gift more and spend less with our value sets, packed with the best makeup, skincare, fragrances, and hair care they'll love. This year's showstopper gift sets are bursting with beauty products from Rare Beauty, Summer Fridays, Glossier, Amika, and so much more. Shop holiday gifts at Sephora.com and give something beautiful.
I am Nicole Khalil, and you're listening to the This Is Woman's Work podcast. We're together. We're redefining what it means, what it looks and feels like to be doing woman's work in the world today. And if there's one thing that has always been and will always be part of that work, whether we acknowledged it or not, it's friendship. We've talked a little bit about friendship on this show before. Friends as soulmates, the challenges of trying to make new friends when you're an adult, and the types of friends that I believe we all need. We've covered some of the who and the how and the why when it comes to this incredibly important connection. But what we haven't done is zoom out and examine the concept of friendship itself. Like, why is it that we expect our friendships to stay perfectly aligned through every major shift in our life, like all of our romantic relationships, career changes, having or not having kids, living in different parts of the world, when literally nothing else in our lives ever does stay perfectly aligned? Why do we treat every single disagreement or season of distance as a red flag instead of a normal rhythm? Why is cutting someone off represented as maturity on social media while sticking it out sometimes gets labeled as having weak boundaries? We've ultimately created a culture where friendships are expected to deliver constant emotional return on investment, where we're told to ask ourselves if this friendship is quote unquote serving you, far more than asking ourselves, how am I showing up for this person? And where the normal ebb and flow of human connection gets pathologized as toxic. We hear more about mean girls, cutthroat career women, and bridezillas than we ever do about what it feels like to navigate the quiet, complicated realities of friendship, the drift, the repair, and the choosing again and again. Maybe, just maybe, women aren't as bad at friendship as the medias like to portray. Maybe we've just created or bought into a version of it that's not built to last. So today we're going to look at friendship from a completely different angle: historical, cultural, and evolutionary. Because the way we view friendship now, it hasn't always been this way. And maybe it's time to examine and rethink what we expect from each other. Our guest is Tiffany Watt-Smith, a cultural historian and the author of the Book of Human Emotions and Schadenfreude. Her TED Talk, The History of Human Emotions, has been viewed more than 4.5 million times. She's a BBC New Generation thinker, a fellow of the Royal Historical Society, and was the director of the Center for the History of Emotions at Queen Mary University of London. And her newest book, Bad Friend, is hitting shelves, and I cannot wait to talk about this concept. So, Tiffany, thank you for being our guest. And I would love to start by asking about the book and the title, Bad Friend. I mean, what are we talking about here? What do we need to know about what it is or what it isn't to be a bad friend?
So we're surrounded in our culture by so many idealized and kind of extraordinary images of what female friendship might look like. And certainly it can feel very hard to live up to some of those perfect images. If you think about, I don't know, the foursome from Sex and the City, or the workplace gal pals in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. You know, there's so many wonderful images of female friendship, and that's right, because female friendship is an extraordinary thing. But there are, as you said in your introduction, so many ways in which friendship can go through different seasons, where friendship can feel like it's dropping out of connection, where we might worry that we are being or that we have a bad friend. And this is a phrase I've heard myself say. I've heard other people around me say, am I a bad friend? Am I being a bad friend? So I was really interested in trying to unpick, what does this phrase mean? How do we learn what a bad friend might look like? How have we? What are the narratives and the images that have taught us what a bad friend might be? And I think it's really important that we understand those stories, because they're part, I think, of what might stand in the way of us taking the leap that friendship requires. I mean, we're living, and we're told this quite a lot, that we're living in this age of disconnection, of loneliness, of isolation, where it's harder than ever to make connections with each other. And I wonder if part of the reason for this is because we have a very narrow idea about what good friendship looks like, and a very sort of elaborate idea about what bad friends might be. And so that was the basis of my wanting to really unpick this idea, what it meant to me as an individual, and also what it had meant across time as well.
So as you were talking, that speaks to what was going on in my brain, because I think we've got a lot of information. Like you said, we tend to elaborate a lot on what it is to be a bad friend. We talk about toxic people and toxic friendships and toxic relationships ad nauseum. But the flip side of that would be like ideal or perfect friendship. And I don't know if that actually exists. Like maybe you have one friend over the course of your lifetime that's like that, you know, ideal relationship or whatever. But there's so much opportunity in the middle, in between those things, for all of us to be normal, human, imperfect people in relationship with each other. First, let me just ask what your reaction to what I just said. Is that kind of on par with what you're saying, that we have a lot of information about what it is to be toxic, and this idea then that there is these perfect relationships as opposed to a lot of gray area in the middle?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. So as a historian, one thing that I can tell you is that the history, throughout history, our idea of friendship has changed quite significantly, and the big change that's occurred is to do with gender. So for thousands of years, in fact, um, uh, men were considered to be the great experts in friendship. They were the ones for whom, poetry was written about their friends, monuments were erected to great male friendships across time. And women were considered to be rather inferior and kind of incapable of forming very close and sustained bonds. And this idea began to change in the 18th century with new ideas about emotion and sympathy, which was the old word for empathy. And by the 19th century, we start getting this idea that women are actually better at friendship than men are, and this is completely transformed from earlier centuries. And the idea that women were better at friendship came from this notion that they were more inherently emotional, better at empathy, that they were kind of somehow hardwired to always care for other people and always put other people's needs first. So it was kind of connected with this idea of the woman as the angel of the house, who is sort of endlessly putting everyone else's needs before her own. And so that having a group of female friends became a very important signifier of being a kind of successful, living a successful female life. That's how by the end of the 19th century, that was pretty well established. There had been a very dramatic reversal of earlier periods in time. Now, in the 20th century, which is the century I think that most clearly shapes the narratives of friendship we're living in today, people began to really idealize female friendship. Obviously, as women experienced all kinds of new freedoms, so their relationships with each other became much more visible. So they were there in Hollywood movies and on fashion shows and in advertising. And then as a century went on, they were discussed in self-help books and magazine columns and in popular fiction, and then of course on TV and in the news and so on. So female friendship becomes a lot more visible, and as it becomes a lot more visible, it also becomes much more open to vigilance and patrolling. So people start giving all kinds of advice about the kind of dangerous bad friends that you might meet. So, for example, in the 1930s, as women were joining the workforce in much larger numbers, and they were working in large offices that considered themselves to be very exciting places where people from all over America would end up working in these offices. And there was a lot of sort of self-help literature written for young women, particularly at that time, about how they should behave in these offices. And of course, there was lots of advice about what you should look like and how you should be deferential to your male boss and so on. But there was a lot of information about how you should relate to other women in the workplace. And the key thing was that you should not, under any circumstances, make friends with those women. So you should be polite and you should be charming and you should be friendly, but you should not make any kind of intimate friend of anyone in the office. Now, the book I'm particularly thinking about was written by a woman called Elizabeth McGibbon in 1936, and it was published. It was on the New York Times bestseller list the same year as the much better known now Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People also hit the bestseller list. And of course, as anyone who's read Carnegie's book knows, that advice is diametrically different. So his book was aimed at mostly male salesman. And he says, well, it's really important to foster friendships and foster connections. And he understands that it's part of what we nowadays would call social capital. It's very important to have these kinds of connections and networks. So whereas women that year were being advised to absolutely don't make close friends because there's a risk that you might get drawn into gossip. There's a risk you might get drawn into cliques. You might spill your heart to a woman one week and then the next week discover that you hate each other and she gives away all of your secrets. So the kind of version of female friendship that was being portrayed, that it was a very a dangerous place where women kind of lacked all discernment and were endlessly making terrible choices about the women they might be friends with. Men were being advised, well, it's very important to make friends and it's very useful for your business. So here in that little example, there's a clear sort of sense that, yes, there are these terrible, dangerous female friendships that become part of popular culture in the 20th century. And then there is some version, that sort of floats above those terrible, these terrible, dangerous friendships, of some kind of perfect friendship that's always being kind of implied and invoked, but no one ever seems to quite achieve it. So I think that repeats itself through the 20th century. We get a lot of media images about that kind of warn us, as you were saying, about these kind of terrible dangers of friendship, and then imply a kind of some kind of friendship which is free from all friction, risk, tension, even change. So that the ideal friendship is this kind of lifelong best friendship where those friends are always there for each other and are always completely supportive and empathetic and always putting each other first in that manner of that Victorian ideal. And if they're not quite achieving that, then they kind of like fallen off the pedestal into this terrible morass of toxic, as you say, cliquey, unreliable, dangerous friends.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Prince Charming version of friendship, right? Like we've romanticized it to this idea that someone's going to say and do all of the right things all of the time. And if they don't, they must not love you enough. They must not care enough and therefore should be cut out of your life.
I think that's incredibly dangerous. And I get the impression that you do too, because, friendship is a human relationship. And as humans, of course, our lives change so much across time, and as we as individuals are encountering different kinds of things in our lives, whether that's to do with work or raising families or looking after elders or living in different parts of the world, and we have to expect a certain amount of drift and change and sometimes even friction in our friendships. And to sort of not be able to manage that, I think is very problematic.
100%. And I found the history very interesting and in some cases shocking. Like this idea that for many, many, many centuries that men were touted as being better friends. It's so foreign to what I think we hear today. But I also think I've seen a lot more messaging, at least in the last couple of decades, of this more women as mean girls, can't totally be trusted, ultra competitive in the career space. It's, I think, sometimes a little bit hard to navigate. So let's talk about some of these things that may be being labeled as bad as opposed to just part of the reality in which we live in, like friendship dips or times and spaces where, we're not totally connected. We both said a handful of reasons why that might be. Living in different places, having or not having kids, romantic relationships, career, whatever is sort of getting in the way. This idea that distance in a relationship is somehow telling you how valuable the relationship is or isn't. So let me start there. What's a different way to look at it besides it being toxic or a sign that this person doesn't care or that the friendship should be over?
If you're anything like me, drinking enough water every day sounds great in theory, right up there with getting 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep and folding the laundry right away. Which is why I found a smarter way to stay hydrated with Cure. Cure hydration packs are clean and simple, plant-based electrolytes, no added sugar, and just 25 calories. They hydrate better than water alone, and get this, they actually taste good. My favorite flavor is lemonade, but they have several great flavors that you can try, which make drinking water feel like less of a chore. They even have a Cure Hydration variety pack for kids. JJ uses them over long practices or tournament weekends, and honestly, I use them then too, because hauling kids around to all of their activities should qualify as a sport. Listen, staying hydrated isn't just about water. You also need electrolytes. That's why I love Cure. It's clean, tastes great, and actually works. And for This Is Woman's Work listeners, you can get 20% off your first order at curehydration.com/womanswork with code Woman's Work. And if you get a post-purchase survey, make sure to let them know you heard about Cure right here. It really helps support the show. Don't just drink more water, upgrade it with Cure.
The Who's Down in Who Newville were making their list, but some didn't know Walmart has the best brands for their gifts.
What about toys? Do they have brands kids have been wanting all year?
Yep, Barbie, Tony's, and Lego. Gifts that will make them all cheer.
Do you mean they have all the brands I adore?
They have Nintendo, Nespresso, Apple, and more.
What about...
So the Who answered questions from friends till they were blue. Each one listened and shouted, from Walmart? Who knew? Shop gifts from top brands for everyone on your list in the Walmart app.
Una silla de masajes puede parecer extravagante. 8 configuraciones diferentes, intensidad ajustable, además es calefaccionado. Y se siente tan bien. Sí, una silla de masajes puede parecer extravagante. Y 2, bueno, aún más. Pero cuando esas sillas de masajes vienen con un auto, se vuelven bastante prácticas. El nuevo Volkswagen Tiguan 2025 con funciones premium como los asientos delanteros con masaje disponibles. Solo parece extravagante.
So one of the ideas that I found really useful that I came across when I was writing the book was two psychotherapists called Susie Orbach and Louise Eichenbaum, and they were writing in the 1980s. They were feminists and they'd worked, they'd been part of the women's liberation movement, and they'd set up a psychotherapy practice together in London. And they were really interested in the idea. They called it bonding without cloning. And what they meant by this was they believed that women were kind of socially primed to always put their own desires and experiences in line with other people's. And one of the things that happens when we do that is when we meet other women, when we become friends with other women, there is they argued there is this kind of merging that takes place where we kind of feel as if we're part of the kind of almost the same being, and it's something kind of wonderful when we have that experience. We meet someone and we feel like, you talked about You've done an episode on friends as soulmates. We do get that sudden, very powerful feeling that we somehow share some histories, a lot of experiences. There's something about us that feels, almost the same. And that they argued was very alluring for women in particular, because women are socialized to really value the sensation of merging with someone else and putting, aligning themselves to their desires and experiences. And they said, well, this is all good, and it's very exciting when that happens, because we have it can create this kind of wonderful sensation of empathy and compassion for each other. But one of the problems that is that when we eventually have to separate, when we have experiences that don't completely align, when our lives go in different directions, then it can be very traumatizing, actually, to have those separations and to go in different ways. So the reason why I wrote this book, Bad Friend, was because was out of a very sort of traumatic friendship experience I had in my late 20s, and I write about it quite a lot in the book. It was with a woman who was my best friend. She was called Sophia, and we had really seen ourselves as soulmates. We had been in many ways inseparable. We had loved when people, had thought we were sisters, or so that and we had really enjoyed feeling like we were always completely on the same track. But then actually our lives did start to go in different ways. And it sounds kind of, when I look back, it's sort of heartbreakingly familiar, but also kind of seems so sort of superficial, really. One of the things was that we had very different kinds of careers. She was kind of working in the corporate world, and I was making quite a lot of money. I was kind of running around in low-paid arts jobs. She got married and had a baby. I was still sort of with a string of unsuitable boyfriends, and living in a flat with moldy cheese in the fridge. She was going on very fancy skiing holidays. The idea of going on holiday seemed to, was belonged to a different universe. So our sort of lives were going in different directions, and it was very hard somehow for us to connect across those gaps. And it shouldn't have been, and it's a shame that it was. But I think that was part of that difficulty of separation, that difficulty of saying, okay, actually we are different people. We do have slightly different values at certain times, and we certainly have very different kinds of experiences. And it took a long time, and I talk about this in the book. It took a long time for us to kind of come back together as friends, and to be able to be friends on different kinds of terms. We no longer expect each other to be everything to each other. We no longer expect the other person to always kind of completely get what we feel, or have experienced the same thing, or be on the same page at all times. We have become very different kinds of people, but it took that experience that I described, bonding without cloning. It took me learning how to not expect to clone, but just learn how to bond across difference. Learn how to enjoy all the things in her life that were very different to my own, and to be able to create the space to say, well, look, I don't really know what that's like, but why don't you tell me? This is part of growing up, I think, but it's also, for me, it was very sort of liberating to understand that was actually a very common phenomenon amongst female friends, for these very particular social reasons, which are to do with how women are brought up, and the expectations that we have, that we will form these very intense and close units, and then kind of being left at sea when we have to separate, and we have to manage the difference between us.
So two things popped into my head. First, I as you were talking about the cloning part, I had like actual visceral response of when I was younger, thinking my friends and we had to like the same things. I see this with my 11-year-old. She's like, this person's my friend because we both like the same color and we both play the same video game. And it's like this idea that we're supposed to like and want the same things is what makes friendship, as opposed to, because that's not sustainable. Nobody will ever like and want the same things as another person for the rest of their lives. as opposed to defining friendship as, is this somebody I trust? Is this somebody I feel safe with? Is this somebody I have fun with, regardless of whether or not we like the same things or see the world in the same way? Any reactions to that?
One of the great pieces of advice I had writing this book was actually from my 94-year-old mother-in-law. And she said, she is someone actually who does have a friend, a lifelong friendship. I think she met her very close friend, I think when they were, if I'm right, I think they were 11 in a boarding school in Ireland. And I asked her, because, of course, why wouldn't you? What did she think the secret of this lifelong friendship was? And she said, well, I think you ask yourself, what does she need? And then you try and do it. And I thought that was lovely, that you're sort of you're just trying to help each other out. It's not really to do with, as you say, to do with liking the same thing. And I recognize that I've got an 11-year-old daughter, and she, and I can see the complexities of their friendship groups, and it is often to do with identifying yourself about, what are the kinds of things you like, what is your taste, what do you enjoy, and so on. But ultimately, I think what it comes down to is your willingness to want to do something to help that person, I think.
Mm-hmm. The other thought that kind of keeps popping in my mind is what I believe to be a bit of an obsession that we have with long-term relationships. This idea that it has to last forever in order for it to be real or valuable, as opposed to some people play an integral and important and valuable and loving role in our lives for certain periods of time, but may not be your friend for the long haul. Like, I think back, I have a few friendships that I'm so grateful for that person at that time in my life, but we haven't talked in years. And there's no bad blood. Like, I'm not questioning whether they're a bad friend or if I'm a bad friend. There wasn't a breakup. It just, we evolved into different places in our lives. So I guess my question is, where do we make space for short-term friendships or friendships for a purpose at a period of time, and is that any more or less valuable?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and it's definitely something that has plagued me at certain times too. Was I a bad friend because I had friends who I was very close to for a short period of time, but then hadn't spoken to, as you say, for years, and then you think, gosh, is that some sort of indictment of my ability to have the kind of courage that friendship takes, or something, or the stamina that friendship takes, something like that? I mean, I think there's a few different things to say here. I mean, one of them is that our anxiety about long-term and short-term friendships, that's been around for almost 2,000 years. The ancient Greek philosophers who first started thinking and writing about male friendship, they wrote about the importance of a kind of lifelong bond. That was the kind of pinnacle of friendship. And that was the perfect friendship, and the other kinds of friendships they regarded as inferior. And those were the kind of friendship that would be struck up because you had a kind of shared interest for a few months. You both went to the same boxing club, or else there were friendships that were struck up out of mutual need. So you were both working together and you were helping each other out, and so on. But once those conditions changed, you no longer needed each other, so the friendship kind of fizzled out. So they created this very clear hierarchy between these ordinary kinds of friendships and then this kind of perfect lifelong friendship. And to carry on this thing about gender, they thought men were capable of these perfect lifelong friendships, whereas women were only ever capable of these more pragmatic, transient sort of friendships. So it's kind of built into the cultural DNA of how we think about friendship, to sort of value those transient friendships less highly, and to kind of see them as an inferior breed of friendship. But and this idea was reinforced then in the 1950s and 60s, particularly by sociologists working in America. They were looking at a world where people were much more transient, where people were moving for work a lot more, and where friendship groups would be struck up and then disbanded fairly quickly. So there was a particular strain of thinking about women's friendship at this time, which was to do with this idea that women were creating these very superficial bonds. They had sort of forgotten how to have proper lifelong friendships because they were endlessly moving around the country, usually with their husbands who were moving for work. This was the image that was being presented. And so these women were kind of joining all of the PTAs and the clubs and so on, and they were making these kind of friendships, but then they were dropping them really quickly and then moving on to the next place and doing it all over again. And that was seen, those friendships were, in some of the literature, that those relationships aren't even called friendships. They're called, acquaintanceships. There's this real sense that that's not a proper friendship. So part of what I was really interested in writing this book is trying to reclaim all kinds of previously thought of as inadequate forms of friendship. I think it's really important in an age where we are struggling with the idea of a loneliness epidemic, in an age where we are wondering what the future of friendship might look like, that we can expand our idea of friendship, that we can expand it to include a much more messy, capacious notion of what friendship might be, and that friendships which are transient, friendships we might strike up with strangers even over a few hours, even friendships that we might strike up online with people whose real identities we might not even know. All of those have their place in allowing us to form connections with other people around us.
100%. Okay. My last question is, I'd never really thought about friendship from a historical standpoint before starting to prep this episode. And when I think about women as friends in the past, what comes to mind for me is more like community, even tribal, like women living together, being together, supporting each other through childbirth and all the things. One of the things I think you talk about is this sort of rise of older women choosing to live together and reviving a forgotten model of friendship. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing there?
Yeah. So, one of the things that I enjoyed most researching was this question of older women choosing to live together in self-governing, self-defined communities, co-housing communities, I think they're officially called. So these are communities that, or the people I interviewed were living in quite a wide range of different setups. So some were kind of informally living together as housemates, like the Golden Girls, and some of them were living in quite formal, large communities of 25 or so women, with very clear rules and agreements about all kinds of things. But one of the things I found very inspiring about that model was these were people who were trying to leverage their friendships to make sure they were able to care for each other in their older age, support one another, that they were able also to provide companionship at a time of life when it's very easy to slip into isolation and loneliness, and that they, on the whole, were finding these experiences to be extremely successful. One of the things that I kind of went into those meetings, whether I was visiting those communities in person or meeting them over Zoom, one of the things that I always kind of thought, God, these people are, they're kind of miraculous. They're able to live, with I wasn't sure whether I could really live with my friends again. I wasn't I would hear people talk about this idea that we'd all move in together, and I think, oh, I don't know, would we just all annoy the hell out of each other? Would we be, really frustrated with each other and so on? And so I was always rather in awe of these women who were able to live together. And one of the things I came away from those conversations understanding was that, of course they have their ups and downs, and of course they have fractious moments and conflicts and irritations, and they're not always brilliant at resolving them, and they're not always totally honest with each other and clear about their feelings and so on, and sometimes they do avoid each other and all of the rest of it. But the thing that really mattered was that they kept trying. They kept trying to be friends with each other. They kept, as you said in your lovely introduction, they kept choosing each other. And I thought that was very inspiring, and very different kind of model of friendship. When I was young, I thought friendship really was about, falling in love. I thought it was like some sort of transcendent bolt from the blue. It was sort of something that happened to you and then you fell into it. And then that was kind of it. And of course, as we all know, and as certainly these older women definitely knew, friendship is really about work, and it's about choosing each other and knowing that, you're going to be there for each other.
Yeah. Okay. If you want to learn more about friendship, you can grab the book. Again, it's called Bad Friend. And Tiffany also has a Substack called The Future Feeling. We'll put the link to that and every other way to find and follow Tiffany in show notes. Tiffany, thank you for taking us down a little bit of a historical exploration and, more importantly, a personal exploration about what friendship is and isn't and what it can be. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so friend, here's what I'm thinking is that friendship isn't failing us as women, but our expectations might be. We've been handed a version of friendship that's supposed to be effortless, always aligned, and endlessly fulfilling, which sounds great until you remember that we're human, all of us, messy, evolving, imperfect humans. So friendship dips are normal. Disagreements aren't deal breakers, quite possibly the opposite. And walking through hard seasons together, that's not weak boundaries, that's real relationship. What if being a bad friend sometimes means just being a real one? Honest, flawed, inconsistent, but still showing up in whatever way you can. Because maybe the goal isn't to have friendships that look perfect from the outside. It's to have ones that can weather the inside. Ones built to bend, not break. Ones built to last. And ones that can still be honored even when they don't. That, redefining friendship on our own terms with grace, with more history and more humanity, well, all of that is woman's work.
You know the words dominating today's headlines.
Private equity,
generative capital gains tax,
America's chip
fueled by market volatility.
On Fed rate cuts.
But do you understand how they impact your world and your wallet? In a world that skims the what, understand the why. Because context changes everything. Subscribe at Bloomberg.com.